All translation tasks can be divided into three groups: translation, checking of the bilingual files, and the final recheck. Let's first talk about how translation can be created. The most obvious way is human translation. This is simple. Someone who knows the source and target languages recreates the source text in another language. Machine translation is another way that comes to mind. In the modern world, MT will complete the greater portion of the translated texts every day. The simpler the text, the greater percentage of it will be translated by a computer. Even today, almost all user assistant materials are translated by machines. Soon, this will also be the case with legal documents and texts of similar topics. The third option of creating a translation is transcreation. This is a creative approach to rewriting the text in the target language. I'm not talking about a word-for-word translation or even a general translation of sentences. I'm talking about rewriting of images and the messages that the author is sending in the source text. With transcreation, you can almost completely forget about the source words and recreate the text from the ground up in the target language. Usually, this approach is employed when working on marketing content, when the translator needs to not only speak the source and target languages, but to be a writer of a sort. It is also very important in this case to have a good communication between the linguist and the client, because only then will they see eye to eye on what is the message of the text. Now, let's talk about checking bilingual files, or the CAT2 files that contain two columns of source and target texts. During the previous step, we only generated the text. At this step, we are trying to make it better. I isolated these tasks into a separate group because it's best to complete them in bilingual files and not after the target text was dropped into layout. This will help you save time and money by avoiding unnecessary redos. This group of tasks includes editing, post-editing of machine translation, SME review, proofreading, and copy editing. Editing is a task that follows translation most often. Editor, same as translator, needs to know the source and target languages, and their main goal should be to make sure that the meaning of the translation is the same as the meaning of the source text. An editor can also check for other errors, such as typos, punctuation, style, and so on. But if necessary, all these tasks can be performed by another specialist, while only an editor can make sure that the meaning conforms in both texts. This is because an editor is the last person in the workflow who speaks both the source and target languages. If the text being edited was originally translated by a machine and not a human, this type of work is called machine translation post-editing. The requirements for the freelancer are the same as with regular editing, but they also need to have specific skills. For example, computers don't always use correct grammar, which means that during the post-editing step, sentence structure and word sequence have to be changed and grammar errors corrected. This can often be done semi-automatically, and the linguist needs to have a clear understanding of all the peculiarities of such work. A special type of checking is a review by a subject matter expert, or SME. The goal of such an expert is to find in the translation the description of a function that doesn't coincide with the actual function of an equipment. They can also highlight the terminology that isn't accepted in the field. Proofreading and copy editing are very close to each other. They both include correcting spelling, punctuation, and grammar errors. These job types also assume that linguists speak the target language fluently, but doesn't speak the source language. The difference between the two lies in the fact that copy editing involves working with a style. A copy editor makes the text clearer, more understandable. For this, they may need to remove redundancy or change sentence structure. This is why a copy editor needs to be very careful. A specialist who doesn't speak the source language can remove a part of the meaning implied by the source text during their edits. A copy editor should always contact the editor or translator when in doubt about the meaning of the text. Finally, There's a way to check the quality of translated files that doesn't require you to know either of the languages. This is called quality control, and some companies have entire departments dedicated to it. Quality control can be of two types. One of them is automated, and the second one is visual, which is part of the final rechecks. During automated quality control, bilingual files are checked using QA tools like Verifica. This helps identify missing or double spaces, discrepancies in numbers and dates in the source and target texts, non-compliance with a glossary or different translation of the same terms and sentences, and much more. Quality control specialists look through the results of such automated checks and isolate false positives, or those times when the machine registered an error, but in fact the translation was accurate. The rest of the errors in the quality control reports are passed on to translators and editors for reworking. Finally, we'll talk about the third group of tasks. These are related to simply checking whether the texts follow the client's requirements and can be delivered. They are not meant to actually improve the translation. Usually, this is done after desktop publishing or compiling of a localized software build. This group of tasks can be further broken down into two types. The first type of tasks can be completed by people who know neither the source nor the target language. For example, I don't speak German or French, but I could perform such a task in this language pair. On the other hand, the tasks of the second type have to be performed by those who speak both languages. During visual quality control, mainly the layout is checked. This includes paragraph formatting, correct usage of numbers and dates, headers and footers, design, tables of contents, image captions, and so on. The specialists compare the layout of the original and the target documents, looking for visual differences between them. There's no requirement to understand what is written in the text. The second type of tasks requires the person performing them to know both of the languages. This includes linguistic sign-off, LSO, and linguistic testing. LSO is very similar to visual quality control because it also includes the checking of final and compiled documents. But the point in this case is a bit different. Some errors that are introduced during DTP can be noticed only by native speakers. For example, if the translation was too long, it could have gone off the page and disappeared. In some languages, you can't easily tell where one word ends and another begins, which is why a non-native speaker won't notice if spaces are placed where they should be. At the LSO stage, the specialist needs to carefully check those parts of the text that especially stand out: headings, image captions, lists, citations, and so on. The rest of the text is checked diagonally to mark those errors that could have appeared during typesetting. Sometimes LSO is replaced with proofreading in PDF. The native speaker is expected to read the text fully and correct any errors, including typos and grammar mistakes. But this is a fundamentally wrong approach, because the specialist will need a lot more time to make such corrections in the typeset document. This is why it's always best to make translation corrections in the bilingual files. Linguistic testing is very similar to LSO, but is performed on a localized software. For this task, engineers create screenshots of the source app and its localized version, and the linguist has to compare them to check the translation. Doing this, the specialist can, for example, see when a button translation doesn't follow its actual function. Sometimes, instead of screenshots, the so-called test script is prepared for the linguist, who installs the app, goes through it by pressing all the buttons and opening the necessary screens, and checks the correctness of the localization. The point of this task remains the same: double-check the translation in the localized software.